How do I get to a yes? I'm always trying to figure out, how do I get to a yes? What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Linda Avey. To put it most simply, Linda is a biologist and an entrepreneur at heart. Perhaps most notably, she is the co-founder of 23andMe, a publicly held consumer genetic data company. She was the co-president of the company from 2006 to 2009. Linda is also the co-founder and former CEO of Precisely, an intelligent assistant for clinical care settings. Linda is currently a member on the board of directors of the Human Immunome Project, which is building the world's largest immunological dataset at a population level. And she's a member of the board of fellows at Stanford University's School of Medicine. Linda also graduated with a bachelor's degree in biology from Augustana University. Linda, it's such an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Carly. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So take me to almost your childhood. 5-year-old Linda, you grew up in Black Hills, South Dakota. What did your childhood look like? What type of kid were you?
I was an outdoors kid. I was a tomboy. And at various points growing up, we moved around a lot, actually. My dad was a Lutheran minister, and I think we joked that he would run out of sermons, so we'd have to move to the next town. But it was really, there was certain points where I was living on a camp that in the summertime campers would come, but we'd live there all year round. And we had horses and we had all these things that the campers would do in the summertime, but we would have access to that all winter long. So when I think I was probably 6 or 7, I would saddle up my own horse and go riding, and it was just part of our life. And it was wonderful. And I really gained an appreciation of the outdoors and getting outside as much as I possibly could.
I'm so curious, when did that passion for biology come through? Because it seems like probably not from your parents if your father's a Lutheran minister. So where did that start to seep in?
Well, it's actually kind of funny because my older brother was a senior at Augustana when I joined as a freshman, and he was an accounting major. And I had spent the summers working, believe it or not, at a gas station in the town I grew up in. And during the winter, I'd stay and it wouldn't be as busy because no tourists were coming through town, but I did the books. I was the bookkeeper. So I thought, well, my brother's an accounting major. I'll probably like accounting. So I started out that major my freshman year, and I hated it. And it was really, I was like, I can't believe that my brother finds this so interesting. But I took the non-majors biology class, and I went to the teacher at the end of the semester and I said, did you somehow just make this fun for us non-majors? And he said, no, Linda, I think you like biology. So I switched majors right then and there halfway through my freshman year and didn't look back and loved it.
Wow, I love that. So it wasn't even earlier in middle school, high school, the sciences you weren't gravitated to them then?
Not really, no. I just kind of, I went through high school and, and I did take all the classes I could, like in chemistry and all of that. And in fact, we didn't even offer physics as a class. It wasn't offered to us in high school. And my chemistry professor gave me a physics textbook just to read. So I think I had a bit of a brain for it, but it wasn't until I took that non-major biology class that I was like, wow, this is so interesting.
So once you discovered that, it seems like the most common path is often to go into research or getting your PhD or that type of track, or maybe med school, doing a pre-med track. How were you thinking through what post-college looks like for you?
Well, I was. So after college, I got a job at UC Irvine working in a lab. I was a research associate, and that didn't really appeal to me. And so the PhD track to me it didn't really seem like a good route. And then the more I thought about medicine, which I had all the prerequisites and everything to go to medical school, and back in that day, you didn't get your medical degree as something to put on your resume and then go work at McKinsey or something. You were a doctor. And that also did not really appeal to me that much. I could see myself getting really feeling confined, working in a clinic all the time. And so I chose neither of those paths to get PhD or MD, and ended up sort of coming into the whole biotech industry as it was really just taking off. And that ended up being such a fascinating time. I moved to San Francisco and was working for a company, and I ended up in sales, and I got to go call on all of the really cool biotech companies that were just forming, like Genentech, Cetus, Chiron. They were all just these very exciting places where there was so much interesting work going on. And so that's kind of where my career track took me.
So before we even get into the company you're referring to is Perligen, correct? Is when you joined
No, that was
that later?
That was much later. Yeah, this was a company called Waters Associates, and they made laboratory equipment, especially HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography systems. And those were used in research laboratories in both academic and biotech pharma. It was a very common piece of instrumentation that people were using in their various research projects.
Before we get to Perligen, because I think that's a crucial, almost inflection point in your career, I want to know who was almost guiding you throughout these different transitions? Because like you said, your older brother in accounting, like super far off from this industry. So how were you really thinking of, I want to gravitate towards research and then actually pull away into sales and biz dev? How are you thinking through that, and who was really helping you along the way?
The PhD I was working for at UC Irvine, he is such a wonderful guy, but he was the one who kind of recommended that track for me because he was actually transferring to UC Davis from Irvine. And he said, if you want to come with me and work for me in the lab there, great, that'll be great. And I was like, I'm kind of ready for a change. And he was the one, he actually connected me to the people at Waters, and I got an interview and everything fell into place. So it was, just the right people coming in with advice at the right time.
So walk me through that journey of eventually finding Perligen, and even more so, I heard on another podcast that you mentioned the story of meeting Sergey Brin. He was interested in this study that you were doing. Walk me a little bit through that and what that really did back then.
So Perligen was a really interesting company. It was a spin out of Affymetrix, and Affymetrix makes gene chips, right? So they're the manufacturer of all this analytical equipment and the ability to look at parts of the genome. And so we were set up to actually do studies with that technology. And so this is what I mentioned earlier, where we were now looking for patient samples and looking to do what they call genome-wide association studies of various diseases. And the hardest part about that was we could not really find a lot of patients or DNA samples from those patients. And we actually ran an ad in Science magazine back then, and it was, instead of Got Milk, it was Got DNA. And it was really cheesy. And there was even a picture of I think it was a woman in the ad who had, like, instead of the milk stain, she had a piece of DNA on her upper lip, kind of like God. Those old, I don't know if you're too young to remember those ads.
I'll link it to get that ad. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was where we were. And finally, so we ran that ad, and one guy responded, and he was a neurologist at Mayo Clinic. And it turned out he had DNA from patients with Parkinson's disease. So we jumped on it. We got funding from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. They gave us $2 million to do probably one of the world's first genome-wide association studies. And that was sort of my project that I was managing at Perligen. And so at one point, we decided to have a meeting in California to let people who'd given money to the Fox Foundation, to let them know about where this money was going. And so we did this meeting, and both Sergey Brin and Andy Grove from Intel showed up because Andy had Parkinson's, and Sergey's been very public about the fact that his mother also has Parkinson's. And so he was really interested in learning more about the science of what we were doing. And he sort of kind of cornered me and just started grilling me about the genetics research we did, and asking about the statistical, tests that we ran. And, it was really, he clearly was obviously very brilliant, but was asking all these really important questions. And so that's when I first connected with him.
And in this moment, were you like, this is gold? Like in my career, I feel so fulfilled. Or was there ever a moment like, okay, what could be next? How were you thinking through that moment?
Well, I think what happened then, the other part of that Perligen story is at one point I went to some kind of a meeting, and that all the little exhibitors have their booths and they have their little
like
products,
a trade show.
Like a trade show. And I was just leaving, and as I was walking by one of the tables, I saw this company said, "Get DNA from saliva," and I thought, that's not possible. That's not going to work. So they had little giveaways. So I took one of the kits, took it back to Perligen, and walked into the lab, and I told the scientists, they're like, "You guys, this would be pretty amazing." And they're like, "Yeah, it may not work, but Linda, why don't you spit in the tube and we'll try it? You'll be the guinea pig." And so I did that. And a couple of weeks later, I walked back down in the lab and I'm like, "Well, you guys, how did it go?" And they're like, "Oh my God, it worked beautifully. We got great clean DNA from your saliva." And then I'm like, "Well, did you run it against one of the chips that we were using in our research?" And they're like, "Yeah, actually we did." And the light bulb went on. My DNA is sitting somewhere on a server in the company, and I would love to have access to it. So that's what really where the light bulb went on. Like, and if I'm feeling this way, I imagine a lot of other people would feel similarly.
In that moment though, in that light bulb going off, was that from a consumer of just like, I'm a regular person, I want to know and have access to my data and my DNA data? Or were you thinking even from the hospital medical setting still?
Yeah, it was more just about individual curiosity. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm curious now, looking back at your entire career, in the moments where you thought of yourself as an entrepreneur prior to 23andMe, were there moments that you were like, you know what, I should go start my own thing? Or was it that light bulb at the trade show and you were like, you know what, maybe I should do this?
Yeah, I had a little bit of that. I went to work for this company called Chemdex, and Chemdex was back in the B2B e-commerce days. And it was a company that, it was just during that boom of the late 90s. And so I joined that company, and, we did the like all the other companies where our stock just went flying. And it was just like, it was so fun to be part of that company. And it was kind of like, wow, that could be a pretty interesting thing to do. But I never really had an idea. It was really the idea for 23andMe that just hit me like a brick. And I was like, I've got to do this. I've got to run with this.
That is so incredible. So walk me through that moment. What happened next? What were those first steps? And ultimately, how did you find your co-founders?
So it's interesting. So I used to go running in this place called San Antonio Park, kind of in Cupertino area, and a bunch of Avey. And by then I had moved from Perligen to Affymetrix. I was working there. And I would go running with these guys in the morning, and they were pretty high level at Affymetrix. And I started talking about this idea of, what if people could just get their own genetic data? And they were like, "Linda, you've got to go talk to the CEO of Affymetrix. He will be very interested in this." And so, I'm going to meet with the CEO, and I was a little nervous and got the meeting with him, and he was immediately supportive. And in fact, apparently they'd done a study internally at Affymetrix that I didn't know about, was to gauge whether it was the right time to do a company of that sort. So that was news to me. I was like, wow, I had no idea. And they had brought McKinsey in, and McKinsey did a full, sort of analysis and said, nope, it's probably not going to be a viable model. So they, but then when I came forward with this idea, Steve just said, go do it. And that's exactly what I did.
That point where you have a meeting with the CEO, right? And I think this could be super valuable for so many people in that it's very daunting. Like you said, like the highest level of a company that you truly admire. How did you mentally prepare, and almost like advice you have for others who need to advocate for themselves maybe a little bit more, but are too scared in a sense?
Yeah, well, it's just, if you have a firm conviction about something, I think it just comes through. And if you truly believe in something, and that because that's, as we know, as I know, getting a startup to work takes it's mostly sweat. It's just working hard. And if you believe in your idea, that will come through when you're pitching it. It'll come through when you're hiring people. And so that, I think that is the most important thing, is to have that really strong conviction that what you're doing is super important. And for me, it was a mission. I really felt like this is going to advance our understanding of human disease. And from that, all kinds of things could follow, like making better drugs. And, having that genetics core is such an important thing. And this wasn't that long after the human genome had been sequenced. That was announced around 2000. And so already we have now the tools to start interrogating the genome at such a deep level. And so it just felt like the time, we were probably a bit early just based on the cost of the test in the earliest days, but it's just having that conviction and sticking to it and being very passionate about it.
It's incredible. And I'm so happy you mentioned that self-belief, but also just that raw passion for it. Because I think you're right. I think it just comes through naturally.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about those early days of 23andMe. At what point was there a moment where you were actually completely bought in, we're going for it full time? This is what we're doing.
That was, after I talked to the CEO. So the first person I called was Paul Kusenza, who had been my boss actually at Perligen, and he had since left Perligen, but I'd stayed in touch with him. And Paul is just so good operationally, and he's just a very organized, very thoughtful person. And I thought, he would be an excellent person to work with on this idea. So I called him up and he said, yeah, this sounds pretty intriguing. And he knew the CEO at Affymetrix. They had talked over the years. So I think he knew that we would also get support from the company. And so he was pretty much convinced. But at that point I was like, I'm all in. I'm doing this. I'm going to go for it.
And was that even after the fact? I also heard that doctors, for instance, their first response wasn't too positive, that people would want to see their genetic data. So tell me a little bit about that response and how that still informed your conviction.
Well, I think, and what I realized later on is that because a lot of doctors, their immediate reaction was people are going to jump off bridges. Literally, that's what they anticipated that people would do. And I realized that probably the primary reason for that is that when doctors are in medical school or, when they're getting their training, they only learn about the most severe genetic examples, like Huntington's and right. That one came up a fair amount. So they were thinking more through that lens of serious conditions that people, if they've got the genetics for it, and Huntington's especially, it's a certainty, that you're going to get the disease. And so I think that was how they were picturing, like, all these people were going to be finding out that they're at risk for these diseases, not even at risk, they're going to get these diseases. And as we know now, most people who do 23andMe, they get their results back and they're like, oh, I guess I'm okay. Maybe I have a little bit of increased risk for diabetes or heart disease, but it's nothing that black and white for the most part. I mean, some people do learn very life-changing information, like for people who find out they're carriers for the BRCA mutations that increase their risk for breast cancer.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's where it came from the medical side. And I understand it better now. But at the time, I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Why are people going to be jumping to that conclusion and then jumping off a bridge? And it was really kind of shocking that was their reaction.
When did Anne essentially join, or when did that three of you become the ultimate trio of saying we're the founders of 23andMe?
Well, so going back to that running group, and I told them that I had met Sergey Brin and that he seemed very interested in genetics, and one of the guys was on our investor relations team, and he's like, oh my God, you just reminded me that I keep getting emails from Anne Wojcicki. She wants to come and visit Affymetrix, and we haven't followed up on it. And I was like, you guys, are you crazy? And so I got her email address and I emailed her. And so we were in contact, and then, Paul and I started building out the idea. We put a deck together, and then I thought, we should go meet with Google. I should follow up with Sergey and see, is this something that these guys are going to be interested in supporting, or, how will they react to this idea? And so I got a meeting at Google with Larry Page, Sergey Brin, I don't remember. I think Eric Schmidt might have even been there. So it was like their head leadership, and
Totally.
it was only supposed to go for like 45 minutes. I think we talked for an hour and a half, and they were clearly very intrigued. And so at that meeting, and our attorneys at Affymetrix were very strict about everybody had to sign an NDA in that meeting. And then Anne just showed up because Sergey must have told her about it. And she just came bebopping into the room and sat down. And it was like, and I could tell some of the Affymetrix people were like, what is she doing here? But I was like, oh, this is great, because I had met her at that point, and she's very charming and, a lot of fun. And I thought, this, it's fun to have a chance to talk to her. So that's where I first met her, or, that the conversation first started happening.
I talk a lot about, one, there's an aspect of being a female founder, right? And, funding and the challenges that come with it. I want to know, what was it like around 2006, this time in deep biotech, in a space that you're working in? How was that experience? And did you ever feel, like maybe Paul needs to deliver this message here, or I feel confident to deliver it? Like, was there ever those dynamics that came into play?
Well, yeah, I think it was, I think as a woman at the time, and I was 46 years old, I'd never started a company before. I don't think I necessarily had all the confidence to be kind of the one
Naturally
out there, just, delivering the message and everything. So Paul was, he was very much a partner. And, I think it gave me comfort to have another person on the team who I could rely on. But as far as the science went, I felt like, that was my bailiwick. That was the area that I felt very comfortable about. And that was, and we were coming from with that background. And I think that was super important.
What was the aspect of those early days that differed a lot from expectations, right? Because you said first-time founder, didn't really know what that means per se. And I think still to this day, most people don't really know what it means unless you're actually in it. So how did expectations differ from reality?
Well, it was funny. So then, Anne joined up, and she became our third co-founder. And I think there was a lot of people looking, and back then, because neither of us had our PhDs, I think there was skepticism about, how much do we actually understand the science? And there is such a built-in bias, I think, in the academic and scientific world. Like, if you don't have that credential of a PhD, they're going to question your veracity and your knowledge of the subjects. And so I think that's actually still true to this day. I don't think that's changed all that much.
I think that's true. Even from the companies that I see, right, is you look at their background, and that weighs pretty heavily to say, like, okay, they know their stuff, because it's such a hard field to be in if you don't necessarily.
Yeah.
And when you think back of that journey, you were co-president of 23andMe for those 2006 to 2009, as I mentioned in the intro. What are you most proud of? How do you think of that experience today?
Well, we were building out something that didn't exist, this interface to consumers to understand their genetic information. And we literally thought through every aspect of every report we wrote. We were so fortunate that we hired amazing scientists who joined the team. So they were going through and just filtering through all the research and trying to figure out, okay, what can we actually tell people about their genetics? And it was just exciting. I mean, I went into work every day just looking forward to these conversations we were having, because we were just creating this from nothing. It was just out. We had nothing to start with. And I think that's why, it was just so much, it was so interesting. But we were also very concerned about being careful with how we built the interface, how we explained things to people. And we wanted to make sure we made it as clear as possible. And so to this day, I think a lot of that, the format that we designed, that we came up with, and sort of the idea around the company is really the core of it to this day. So it really was, I think, just game changing in terms of, consumers understanding genetics.
And in those early days, how did you balance the aspect of move fast? I don't want to say move fast, break things, but essentially that really agile approach of being a startup, testing out things with consumers, getting feedback, iterating. But then on the other hand, being super careful. Like you said, this is like a serious message you're giving them. There's a lot of important information that's pretty serious stuff with serious ramifications as well. How did you guys balance that?
We believed that people understanding something even complex as genetics, it's just how you explain it, it's how you position it, and you have to do it in this careful way. But we went forward on the premise that we felt like it was doable. We could make this stuff interesting and understandable to the average consumer, and that was our challenge. But we felt confidently that we could accomplish that, and that we stuck to our guns. I mean, we had this one ethicist come over from Stanford because we were just going out and talking to people in the field. And we explained to this guy what it was we were planning to build. And he was kind of sitting back like, I don't know. And he was kind of like, I'm not sure. And we're like, well, do you have any advice for us? And he said, well, you could not start the company. And we're like, okay, that's enough of that. I escorted him out. And we were like, okay, that was one perspective, but that's not the one we're going to follow.
Great. Like super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Were there moments though where you actually heavily considered, do we need to shut this down?
Never once. Nope. It was, and it, and for me, because it wasn't just about giving people their genetic data. So at Perligen, I ended up working within a lot of disease communities. And those people were so hungry for deeper research. They wanted more to be done. And so I'd worked very closely with the autism community, all the diseases. And when people heard about what we were doing, they were just like, they would get so excited because they saw a different and faster way to start to solve some of these problems. And so that to me was sort of my North Star. Like, if we can help patients and we can start to drive research forward more quickly, then we're doing the right job.
Before we talk about you ultimately leaving 23andMe, I'm wondering, having 3 co-founders, that brings 3 different opinions, 3 different thoughts. There's a lot that goes with that dynamic. I'm wondering how you navigated that, and if you ever ran into challenges, and if so, how did you deal with them?
I'd have to say that we were all in agreement about the basic premise for what we were building. And we would have, and it was more like with the science team, like, how do we position, for instance,
Right.
When we would come out with a report and write up a report, it would be based on research that had been done and published, right? And so we had to make sure that people understood the validity of that science. And so we actually came up with a ranking system of 1, 2, 3, or 4 stars for a report. A 4-star report meant that it had, it was a great study, had statistical power, enough people enrolled in the study that we felt like it was meaningful. But the thing we decided, and there might have been some debate on this, but of these, like, some studies would come out and say, oh, we found the genetic link for X, Y, or Z disease. And even though they weren't necessarily a 4-star in our minds, we kind of had a feeling like the mainstream media might pick up on these articles and write about them. And so we felt like we were doing a more responsible job of being able to relay to people what was the actual validity of that science and cover it at that level. Because not a lot of science journalists would go and they wouldn't read the paper, they wouldn't look at the statistical numbers, they would just sort of put it out there. It's kind of black or white. And so that was something that we felt was super important. And that's how we sort of, rationalized why we were putting out certain reports, because it's a 1-star report, but it's been published, and we want to convey that to our customer base.
And I think what you touch on as well is just the ultimate, and this goes with any partnership really, is just having an alignment of those fundamentals, which it seems like you guys really did from the very beginning. And then anything above that is kind of extra decisions, but you can almost go back to those fundamentals, which is so important.
Yeah. But I will say there was one thing that I felt very strongly about from the beginning, is that because we knew eventually we would start putting surveys out to our customer base to start answering questions about their health. And that's where we would have the data then on the back end to do research. And my feeling on it was that if we made a discovery of a genetic association, that we would never patent anything. That was my position. And it came really from, kind of seeing what was going on with BRCA. Back in the day, there was only one company called Myriad Genetics that could do the BRCA test because they had the IP all locked up. And to me, that just seemed crazy. Like, how is it that one company can give women and men access to their data on these very important genes. And so I would speak at conferences. I was very vocal about the fact that I just didn't agree that DNA patents, and it actually came down to the technical sort of insight and the fact that you haven't invented anything when you make a genetic discovery. You're just making a discovery. You haven't invented that gene, and you haven't really come up with any intellectual property. And that was my standpoint. So I think there was and Paul stayed at the company for a year. So this was after he left, but it was something that I just was I had strong conviction around that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you make a good distinction in that you didn't necessarily invent it, but what you did invent with 23andMe is really just opening this new category for consumer genetic data. And so ultimately, what made you leave, and what went into that decision to leave 23andMe back in 2009, I believe?
Well, as it's been covered in the Wall Street Journal now, a bit of my story came out in that article. And it was not something that I chose. And it came as a total surprise to me. And just the whole way it was handled was unfortunate. But I think my bottom line is I have no regrets. It was hard to leave my baby, which was the company, but I think, it ran its course and decisions were made that didn't involve me, but that's life. It happens.
And Linda, looking back at that, and obviously, as you said, the Wall Street Journal came out, a lot of things have come out about 23andMe recently. I want to know, what advice do you have for others who may be actually put in a similar position to you, where they don't necessarily have that control and aren't in the room when those decisions are made?
Well, it's just a nature of the beast of doing startups, and when those power struggles start to happen, if you're in the position you're in, and maybe a co-founder has more value, or they have whatever that might be, these things can happen, and I don't know that there's really any way to prepare for it. Unfortunately, I think it's a fact of the matter. And again, I have no regrets at all. I had that opportunity to work there over 3 years, and I think we created something amazing.
Absolutely. I think also, Linda, just highlighting your story from those early days and learning from the trade show, right? Of seeing that and being like, you know what, something is here. Like, whether you knew it or not, like that entrepreneurial itch and that instinct was very natural, it seems. So I love hearing that. And ultimately, you end up founding 2 more companies, and I mentioned Precisely, and you ended up taking a CEO role at Precisely. I want to know actually how that transition was to a CEO role, and what that changed, how that transition was for you, and what you needed to learn to take that on.
Well, actually, so it's a bit of an evolving story of, we decided to start Precisely from, where we were at the previous company. So I was a co-founder of Precisely. And so, I started that, and I brought on my new CTO. It was just sort of a natural. And I actually really liked being in that position of having a very technical co-founder. I mean, that was something that we talked about early on at 23andMe, that we did not have like a CTO type person who was part of our founding team. And I think that's really important, that you have someone, because especially if you're building something where you're going to have all this engineering and all of these systems built, to have someone on your founding team who's sitting at that level with you and making decisions about the direction of the company, that was vitally important. And I think that's something, if a person's thinking about starting a company, and it's especially if it's software based, obviously, it's so important to have a person who's at your level and you're making decisions together, because you can talk about, oh, I want to build this crazy interface with all these bells and whistles, and the engineering person might be going, oh my God, slow down. That's going to be really hard to build. But I think you can get these technical people who also can think like entrepreneurs. And if you find that quality in a person, that's pretty magical.
Building off of that, we see this a lot in early stage investing, right? Is you have a founder, has an idea, but it's just them. And, there's so much research about solo founders. It's super hard. I mean, also just like building a company is really freaking hard. I really want to know what do you think of almost the bucket of I've worked with them and I have this experience working with them. I know that we work well together, so let's start a company, versus almost that maybe inorganic method of co-founder dating.
Yeah.
And how do you view that? And if you think it's still okay to go through that method, even though because it's so important to find that technical person that you may need?
Well, I highly recommend that you get to know a person. It's super important that you learn about them as an individual. What kind of a person are they? What are their values? That is extremely, extremely important. And I would, and I was on the board of Rock Health at the very start, and we saw a lot of founding teams that came together, and then there would be friction, and maybe they hadn't known each other that well. And so when you see that going on, you learn from that, and you realize that the best form is really to be with someone that you know really well.
And looking at your almost entrepreneurial journey throughout, did you have your own personal litmus test that you ran to say, this is someone I want to be in the trenches with?
Yeah, I think, it's just one of these things you learn in life, and you really have to take that and build that into your model. And, it's not always easy to get to know a person through that lens of would they be a good co-founder? But I think you get a gut instinct that builds up over time. And that's why I think, people who start companies at later points in their life, who've had a lot of experience and they've been through a lot of companies and jobs, they might have a little bit better filter and a little bit better perspective on who they think they can work with and who's going to be in something with them for the long run. I mean, it is like a marriage, really.
And it's often harder to even get out of, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a big factor. And given your, experience with 23andMe, what were the main lessons you learned from that perspective of evaluating a potential co-founder or even hiring, whatever that may be, but someone joining super early on?
Well, again, I think it comes down to fundamentals and how you can figure out what they're, I don't even know if you could come up with some sort of examples of decisions that have to be made and kind of do an interview process to say, how would you react to this situation? It's just like interviewing, I think you can really get to the bottom of a person's sort of mindset and their philosophies. And I think that's super important.
I would love to know, we talked a little bit about this actually, but founding a company in biotech, in the sciences, how important do you think it is for someone with a science background what do they need to almost add to their toolkit in order to go found a company in the space? Or is it enough to have that scientific background?
No, I wouldn't say it's enough to have the scientific background. I think certain personalities are just going to be more geared for entrepreneurship. And but I do think having the science background is super important because, and we might have talked about this, but kind of what we're seeing now, what's going on is there's so much talk about AI, of course, and AI is the big word of the day and the big concept. And we're seeing funding going into companies that are being started by people who have AI backgrounds, but they don't necessarily have the science credentials to go with that. I think that's a little bit worrisome. And I think we're going to see some companies that get funded on the glamour of AI, but if they don't, and if they're going into biotech, for sure, they need someone on their team that really has a grounding in the science. Otherwise, they could raise a ton of money, but are they really going to be able to build the important things and stick through? And because we know these things, especially in biotech, it can take years to figure out, is something actually working? So I do worry a little bit about some of the funding that's going into these companies where they don't have a solid basis in science.
So Linda, because now you also have that investor hat, so you're evaluating companies from this perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it's incredibly worrisome. One, there's probably a reason why biotech has maybe a long feedback loop or at least a long process to evaluate whether it's drug development, whatever it may be. And now AI has often sped that up in many different ways.
Yep.
So what do you think beyond just funding? Because I think you're right. I think that kind of gives people the green flag and the ticket to go and run with it. What do you think needs to happen to try mitigate that, or at least protect us in a way from reaching that point?
Well, there's only so much we can do. There's still a ton of money in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in the world for investing in exciting ideas. And so just from our perspective, we can only affect what we're putting money into. And we're just going to have our firm sort of, these are the parameters we're looking for on the team. And, we may miss the boat. I mean, there may be companies that get funding that they get a bunch of money in and it could run for a while, and it might take a while for that to play out. But we're not going to jump in just because every other funder is putting money in. We just feel very strongly about wanting to do the right thing and invest in the solid teams that we think really have a shot at getting to the goal line, because it's just rounds and rounds can come in, and until you have proof points, you don't have a whole lot to go on unless you have a real solid understanding of the science.
And Linda, how has that been for you being on the other side now of the table as the investor?
Well, gosh, I wish I'd known the mindset of VCs better when I was raising money for my companies, because once you learn the ropes of what it takes to be a venture capitalist and, just how a fund is structured, what the investing thesis is. And, because there were times when I was raising money early on at Precisely, and people were like, you're not raising enough. And I'd be like, what? Just write a smaller check. I mean, what's the problem here, right? But it wasn't part of their model, right? So they would have to pass because, they wanted to write bigger checks, even if they did seed investing. And, and it was kind of during those frothy times when people were writing huge checks into companies and people were able to raise a lot of money. But, I'm sort of the mind that companies should start simple with their simple premise, raise enough to get built up to the next point. And, these huge sky high valuations. And, that's been kind of cleared out of the system somewhat, but not necessarily in AI. We're just seeing so much money being pumped into that category now. And I think, we just want to make sure we keep our heads on straight and follow the what we think are the important scientific leads.
And you also mentioned such an interesting point, which I also realized coming into early stage investing, which is there's a true VC math to it, right? That isn't necessary, like that many founders don't realize, So I think it's such an important aspect when you are accepting funding from a VC, what the expectations are, because I don't know if those expectations are often so aligned.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that founders should even be open to asking and gaining that understanding, and to make sure that there's that alignment. Because I think you're right. There's not that clarity in thought. And you maybe only realize it after the fact once you're on the other side. But I don't think that has to be the case. But that's so interesting.
Yeah. And that's kind of where we feel like being, builders and entrepreneurs, that we come into it in a way that we hopefully can help educate entrepreneurs and founders and kind of give them a little bit more of that backdrop of here's why we're thinking this way, and be very transparent and also very, direct with our feedback. And hopefully in the end, it's helpful to the people we're talking to.
While you're listening to so many pitches from entrepreneurs, I'm curious, have you ever gotten that itch to be like, maybe I have another go around in me?
No. It's funny because okay. I've been saying this to many people now. I have a granddaughter now who's almost 17 months old, and it's been incredible. But I kind of equate investing to being a grandparent, because you can drop in on your portfolio companies, you can check in and see how things are going, and give them advice, and then you can take off and say, see you in a couple of weeks, it's just,
oh, that's great.
But you have so much love and respect for the people that are doing these companies, and you want to help them as much as you can. But the idea of having to build again, it's, I've moved beyond that phase of my life for sure. So I'm glad I had the chance to do it though. My God, it's such an incredible ride.
I love that. And I also love that analogy. I'm going to share that. That's a great one.
Good.
So Linda, I see a few books behind you, and I wanted to know if you had the power to assign a book to everyone on earth to read, and understand, which book would you choose?
Well, it's a new book that I've just gotten a hold of, and it came to me through, I thought, a recommendation. It's a funny story. So I'm in Davos, Switzerland in January, or when was it? Just, a few months ago. And this guy is Ryan Breslow. He's talking, he's just giving a talk, and he's just kind of at the end, kind of throwing out things that he's interested in. And he recommended this book, which I wrote down as The Sovereign Self. And so I was like, cool. I'm always looking for good book recommendations. So I came home and I downloaded it. And it's a teacher. Her name is Acharya Shunya. And it goes back into the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita. And it's really discovering yourself and how you can really have yourself, capital S, be your core and what you really focus on. And so I emailed Ryan when I got home, and I was like, oh my God, Ryan, this book you recommended, Sovereign Self, has just been amazing. And he's like, Linda, I actually recommended Sovereign Individual, which is, I think, about like Bitcoin or something. And it had nothing to do. So these two books probably could not be more different, but I filtered it and got this book, and I highly recommend it. I bought a copy for my daughter. I've been telling people about it. It's really pretty phenomenal.
It was meant to be.
Exactly.
That's the most serendipitous process. I love that.
Exactly.
It almost reminds me of the concept of ikigai. Is it along those lines? Or I don't know if you know that, where you you find basically what you love, I have to look it up again, but what you love, what essentially gives you that security. And there's some other quadrant, but it's like, what is that middle that is really giving you like a life's purpose? But I'm excited to take a look at that. That looks amazing.
Yeah, you should definitely check it out. I've just been kind of overwhelmed at the power of her message.
Okay, I have a few more fun questions, if you will, that I like to ask my guests.
Okay.
Which another one is, what is the most significant thing you've actually changed your mind about over the past decade?
Oh, this might shock people, but the use of psychedelic drugs. I grew up in the don't just say no, Nancy Reagan's, thing about drugs. And I was raised at a time when drugs were bad and you shouldn't use them. And my mind has shifted so much on that. And I think a lot of people's have shifted on these drugs had so much power and possibility, and it just got shut down in the 60s and 70s. And I think we really missed out on huge opportunities to improve human health through the use of these compounds and these molecules.
And are you going off of recent scientific research where microdosing, I know I've also read a bit about, like, in terms of depression, it helps solve that. Like, how are you thinking through it? Because I'm more in the other bucket where I'm still a bit against it. But yeah, I would love to know more.
Yeah, it's truly come because the scientific community now is finally getting the ability to do true clinical trials, and studies are going on now all over. Johns Hopkins is doing a lot. There's a lot going on here at UT Austin, where they're drugs are like every other pharmaceutical in the world that has such great potential to help humans. And I actually also went to a dinner here in Austin where a group of people came down who were working on the legalization of some drugs in Colorado. And at that dinner, everybody went around the table and related their own experiences. And one guy had been in the military, had severe PTSD, suicidal, and psychedelic drugs changed his life. So that there's a lot to be learned in that space.
Wow, interesting. Okay, my favorite question, which is, what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
So I have to say that, and I may not have called it this back before I started reading this book, The Sovereign Self, but I'm really working on this ability to recognize myself and what are the external things in the world that affect how I react and how I respond, and being able to take a step back from that and just have a solid core and a firm basis in my own being, And then, but then how to turn that out to the world in very positive ways. So, and that is a lifelong journey, being able to get skilled at that. And it's a practice, it's not just, you just don't read a book and suddenly you're a new person. You really have to work at it.
I love that. And from a tangible perspective, do you journal? Does reflection come through just, setting aside time, meditation? How do you actually practice it?
Yeah. So meditation is something I've not done much of it in my past, but it is something now that I'm really focusing on. So yeah, it's exciting. It's just a great journey to start at this point in my life.
Yeah, I'm excited to read that book. I think that book seems so powerful. So I'm looking forward to that.
And I highly recommend the audio version, getting her, because her voice, there's something about just the way she relates the stories. And it's really the great format to learn about her, just her whole, and her grandfather was her teacher. And this goes back in her family thousands of years. And so to have it be in the current day, she brings it to the present in such a relevant and moving way.
Amazing. I have a long drive coming up, so that'll be my listen. I love that. Well, Linda, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on She Leads.
Thank you, Carly. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.